Moving on, I just saw about when I was starting recording that Estonia's parliament is calling for the creation of a no-fly zone in Ukraine as the Russian attacks continue throughout the country. And, they're quite close to all this, so I could understand why they're getting a little nervous. And this is kind of big news, to be honest, because Estonia is a NATO country, right? So this is a NATO country calling for it. And as we know what happens, if one NATO country gets involved, they all do. So it's not good. And just some food for thought here. I am not calling for a no-fly zone as of now, but I've been listening to different perspectives on it. And one is from Garry Kasparov, who's one of the greatest chess players in history, Russian-born, but has become just a huge activist for democracy and calling out Russia. And I really enjoy hearing him talk. He's really an astute speaker and just a really good intellectual. But he actually argues for no-fly zones. And I don't totally agree with everything he says, but I think it is interesting to just give this perspective. He says that by installing a no-fly zone, it could deter Russian planes and jets from going into these areas because they know it would be a death wish, right? Obviously, it would be considered an act of war in Russia. They've made that very clear. But I guess the argument for supporters of a no-fly zone is that many Russian pilots may not even want to fly into Ukraine because they know it would be the end, right? We have to remember the Russian forces have been pretty ill-trained and disillusioned, and some don't even really want to be there, it sounds like. And so if a no-fly zone were to be instated, would they actually risk their lives and go into there? Could it deter Russian jets? Could it deter Russian bombs? Maybe. Now, the counter to that, and it's important to also mention, is that the devastation has not only come from the air, and the majority of it, from what I've gathered, has come from artillery on the ground. So if we did put in a no-fly zone, would it just piss off the Russians even more and just put Putin even closer to chaos and insanity? It's a tough one. I don't have a perfect answer yet, and we're just going to have to keep watching. But there are smart people on both sides of this. And I think it's important to have the conversation, but as I'll go into later, as this is getting closer and closer to NATO's borders, something is going to need to happen, you know what I mean? And I don't really know what that is yet. Anyways, it's been hard to research some of this stuff just without getting sad or just furious, Sunday night, when I was doing it, I read that the city council of Mariupol has said that 2,187 residents have been killed since the start of Russia's invasion, which is just tragic, and I'm sure there's more, and that's just one city. Let's remember that. So the numbers are just getting insane already. Also, I saw this morning, that the number of refugees fleeing Ukraine is nearing 2.7 million, and that's according to the UN. And as of Sunday, I saw that the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Russia might use chemical weapons in Ukraine, and that such a move would be a war crime. I mean, I feel like Putin's already conducting war crimes, and that's like the big problem with that is like, yeah, you can say it's a war crime, but until he actually shows up in The Hague or admits them or is punished for them, it's really just saying he's committed war crimes, and I hate that, but it's kind of true in this point, Also, I saw people in Kyiv are scrambling to escape because the bulk of Russian forces are about 16 miles or 25 kilometers from the center of the capital. And, we've already seen fighting in the outskirts. If you look at the map, it looks like kind of the east and southeast are slowly growing into the Russians' favor. And you see that red coming down from Belarus getting closer to Kyiv. So that is alarming. And it comes even more alarming when we hear these warnings from NATO and the UN about nuclear conflict being more likely than ever before. You have to wonder, on Friday I talked about tactical nukes. They would be good at destroying a smaller city or causing chaos in a city. So you have to wonder about Kyiv and those, which would be just tragic and atrocious. And I don't even know where we go after that. I've also seen this just insane story in Melitopol, which is another Ukrainian city, where apparently Ukraine's parliament has claimed that the previous mayor, who is Ivan Fedorov, was kidnapped by armed men acting on behalf of the Kremlin. Imagine that you're just, hanging out in your city. They're not hanging out, but imagine you're just in your city and the mayor gets kidnapped one day, by another country, by the way. Ugh. And apparently within a day or so, a new mayor was installed. And apparently this gal is Russian-backed. And she told the population. Sorry, God, I can't speak today. She told the population to prepare for some changes. Yeah, that's insane. Just not right. But I've been seeing this story. I mean, just imagine they replace your mayor with a Kremlin crony. I also saw that a bipartisan committee in the U.S. has warned of cyber attacks coming very soon. The worry is that they could be like those solar winds attacks from back, I think it was in the summer of 2020. Or no, I think it was in 2021. My bad. And that also really is quite alarming. We have to remember that Putin, I mean, just another awful thing Putin does is he's basically allowed hackers who do illicit activity to work out of Russia, and he doesn't convict them. I've seen videos online of just wealthy cyber hackers just riding around terrorizing the streets of Russian cities. They have just expensive Lambos and stuff like that. And it's all because as long as they don't hack Russian systems or cause trouble for the Russian government or Russian companies, Putin kind of gives them a pass. And so I'm sure Putin is even like asking them to do something at this point. But again, we have to remember that's also most likely an act of war if they did that at this point. So we're just like playing a very atrocious game of chicken right now that is not leading anywhere good, and it's getting pretty worrying if you ask me. And also, I think it was late Saturday night or maybe early Sunday. It does look like the invasion and the violence is getting way too close for comfort to NATO territory, because I think it was early Sunday that authorities in Lviv said that the Russian military launched a deadly airstrike targeting a Ukrainian base in Yavoriv, which is near the Polish border, and it killed at least 35 people. And apparently the Russians said the base was a training site for foreign military. And The Guardian mentions that the airstrike on the Lviv air base in the far west of Ukraine came hours after the Kremlin, which said Western military equipment destined for Ukrainian forces was being stored at the facility, had described Western supply lines into Ukraine as legitimate targets. And so there's a lot of Western supplies coming in from, obviously, Western Ukraine or Eastern Poland in that area. And it does look like the Russian forces are now really focusing on that. And this base is really close to the Polish border, right? It also mentions in this same Guardian article that Britain said the incident marked a significant escalation of the conflict, and the proximity of the attack to Poland's border, less than 10 miles away, prompted the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, to warn that any fire, even accidental, on a neighboring NATO country would trigger a full-force NATO response. And so we are just playing with fire at this point, and we just have to remember this is Putin's doing. I've heard a lot of the useful idiots on kind of both sides trying to say, well, if NATO wasn't expanding, or if we just gave Putin what he wants, or Putin gave terms last week. He said just give up the Donetsk and Luhansk territories and never join NATO and disarm and be neutral. It's like, okay, well, you've just like attacked a sovereign country and killed thousands of civilians, probably tens of thousands of civilians at this point, and now you just expect that to be okay. It's like it's insane to me. This whole thing is just nuts. So yeah, we have to remember that Putin's the bad guy here, and he's putting the West in just an atrocious situation. It's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough.